Okay, once again, welcome to everybody joining this ICAHD UK webinar today. ICAHD UK was formed in 2004 in order to support the Israeli Committee Against House Demolitions, ICAHD. The original slogan for ICAHD was resisting occupation, constructing peace. A few years ago, we felt we needed to update that slogan. It is now resisting apartheid, building a shared democracy. You see, it does more accurately describe today's reality. Earlier this month, we planned another webinar, but we found that we had to cancel it at the last minute because of the violence that broke out on the 10th of May. Israel named that Operation Guardian of the Walls. The violence lasted for 11 days. During that time, we saw horrific atrocities happening in Gaza, as well as in the state of Israel, East Jerusalem, and the West Bank. An unexpected development during that time was that we saw Palestinians coming together right across the divide, demonstrating a unity that we'd not seen before. Also during that time, we saw millions of internationals taking to the street in protest of what was happening. We know that certainly in the UK, we've had the largest demonstrations on behalf of justice for Palestinians in history. Last Saturday, there were more than 180,000 on the streets in London alone, as well as demonstrations that have been happening in many other cities in the UK. We also know that more pressure was put on the media because we wanted more honest reporting. Also, there's been petitions and lobby letters going off to our political representatives. Thus, there's been a new mobilization that's been stimulated during this time. And of course, the question is now, where do we go from here? Because although we know that a ceasefire was declared on the 20th, the root causes have not yet been addressed. The root cause of settler colonialism, Israel's intent to take as much of historic Palestinian land as possible with as few Palestinians residing there. So today we're going to look at this now new reality on the ground. Where do we go from here? Now we're hoping to start with hearing from Munir. I don't know if he's with us yet. He is.
Yes,
okay.
I'm here, yes.
So we've got, excellent. We have two main speakers, Munir Nuseibah and Jeff Halper. Both are speaking to us from Jerusalem. Munir is a human rights lawyer. He's an academic at Al-Quds University in Jerusalem. He heads the Community Action Center in Jerusalem's Old City, and he was instrumental in establishing the Al-Quds Human Rights Center. He's therefore represented Palestinians over many issues, including that of home demolitions and evictions. Munir lives in a home just north of Damascus Gate, actually within Sheikh Jarrah, a site of much violence, protest. It's in the heart of what is happening. And as said, just down from him is Damascus Gate, leading into the old city of Jerusalem. Now, can we start with you, Munir? I think we'd all very much appreciate an update on what is happening in Sheikh Jarrah. Are there still protests? You know, is it still quite a hotbed at the moment? Perhaps then you'll also talk about what's happening in the old city itself, what's happening around the mosque, and then we'll start and we'll go on from there. So Munir, welcome. It's terrific to have you back with us. We had you earlier in the year, and thank you for your time. Munir, Nuseibah from East Jerusalem. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Linda, for having me. It's an honor to speak in ICAHD UK again, and to be with you and with Malcolm. And of course, it's a great honor also to speak together with my friend, Jeff Halper, an important advocate for human rights for many years. He has been very active, very efficient, very influential. So thank you very much. It's an honor to be with all of you. An update about Sheikh Jarrah, Jerusalem, Al-Aqsa Mosque. Basically, since now Sheikh Jarrah, maybe I should give a very quick brief about the Sheikh Jarrah issue, because I'm not sure how much friends in this virtual room know about the issue of Sheikh Jarrah. As you might all know, Israel occupied, I'll start from 67. Of course, there are many points where someone could start telling a story, but I'll start now from 67, when Israel occupied East Jerusalem and annexed it to its territory, applied its legal system, its law, and applied also its court jurisdiction over this part of the city. The annexation and the application of Israeli law and Israeli court jurisdiction has been and continues to be seen as illegal from the international community, because an occupying power is not allowed to annex an occupied territory, is not allowed to use its own law while ruling the occupied territory, and is not allowed to use its domestic courts for ruling the occupied territory. However, this is what has happened. After the occupation, a few years, an Israeli right-wing organization filed a case, an eviction case, against 28 families living in Sheikh Jarrah, who actually happened to be refugees from what became Israel in 1948, because when Israel was established in 1948, 80% of the Palestinian population who lived in the areas that became Israel then were displaced. So these 28 families are part of the wider Palestine refugee problem that had started already in 1948. Jordan and the United Nations Relief and Work Agency for the Palestine refugees, known as UNRWA, hereinafter, Jordan and UNRWA, UN, decided to build houses for these families in return for giving back the card that the refugees use for different issues like medical care, free medical care, and food aid, and schooling and other things. So when this actually happened, after the 1967 occupation, this settler organization claimed that the land on which these houses are built belong to them. It's their land. With some sort of a settlement that happened between the settler organization and an Israeli lawyer who was representing the people of Sheikh Jarrah at the time, that lawyer, without the knowledge of the residents themselves, as they have told me, and as they have announced in different places as well, that they didn't know about an agreement in which that lawyer said that he recognizes that the settler organization owns the land, and that these residents will only be considered as tenants, protected tenants. So this arrangement happened back in the 70s. Then around 30 years later, the settler organization came back and started filing cases for eviction again and again, trying to evict each one of the 28 families in different cases. There is a lawyer now representing this population, and I've talked to him several times actually, he insists that the paperwork that the settlers have used to claim ownership of the land, which is in Ottoman, Turkish. It's an Ottoman document, that it does not indicate even ownership. So that the basis on which these settlers are claiming ownership of the land in the first place is not, is not the right basis, and that settlement which is not written down cannot be considered as a settlement that represents the people themselves. But more importantly than that, in international law, as I mentioned before, the Israeli courts and law should not be applied in an occupied territory. And in international law, the displacement, the eviction of civilians within occupied territory is considered as a war. So it is absolutely prohibited in international law to move families from their homes. So this is the problem in Sheikh Jarrah. The Palestinians are using now social media and other means, demonstrations, etc., in order to say to the world that they should not be displaced, that they should continue to live in their houses. But it's very important also to remember that these people are also refugees. They actually come from what is Israel today. So one of the things that they always say is, look, if you want to reconsider every land, that's good. Let's do that. Let me take my house in West Jerusalem. Let me take my house in Haifa. Let me take my house here and there, and let a just court do that revision, and everybody get what they are, what they should be entitled to according to international law, according to human rights, according to justice. Of course, this case that I'm telling you about, the 28 houses, it's just one small case in Jerusalem. Jerusalem is full of cases like that, cases of eviction, of using the Israeli law in order to more and more displace Palestinians from their homes. I personally, as Linda has mentioned in her introduction, work in representing in Jerusalem. I head a center that does that, so I don't do the representation myself, but my lawyers, my colleagues, they do that. Just to be able to defend themselves, to continue to live in Jerusalem. Just for example, we are all residents only in Jerusalem, according to the Israeli definition, not citizens, residents like immigrants. Even if my family has been in Jerusalem since the 7th century, we are only residents, and Israel revokes residency statuses. Israel restricts child registration, restricts family unification. So Palestinians in general in Jerusalem are very tense because all the time we are going to Israeli legal institutions like the Ministry of Interior or the municipality or the court or in order just to survive and to continue to live in our houses. And this is the case only because we are Palestinian. The Jewish experience in Jerusalem is totally different, and that's important to raise. It's totally different. I will quickly talk also about Al-Aqsa Mosque. So the situation in Sheikh Jarrah is one element of that created tension in Jerusalem, but also since the beginning of Ramadan, the Israeli government started some actions that I consider to be provocations. And I don't know why these provocations happened. Because we are now investigating into the fact, we're documenting what happened. And for example, in the beginning of Ramadan, they cut the sound of the speakers of Al-Aqsa Mosque. There were several incidents in which they started using violence against people praying in the mosque. And according to the initial search that we've done, it's not understood why this actually happened. Why would you enter? Why would policemen enter into the mosque and start shooting at people or using violence against people? This happened several times during Ramadan. And this was what continuously raised the tension for a short war or armed conflict to actually happen. Now, alhamdulillah, thank God, this has ended. The war or the conflict, the armed conflict, the limited armed conflict has ended. However, Sheikh Jarrah, the street in Sheikh Jarrah is still totally blocked. People are not allowed to move there. You're not allowed to enter it. You're not allowed to have coffee in one of the houses that are at the risk of eviction. Of course, you're not allowed, of course, to demonstrate as well in that area. The police is very brutal in that area. And that's the center of tension now, as well as Al-Aqsa Mosque. Since yesterday, Israel allowed Israeli settlers again to enter Al-Aqsa Mosque after stopping them for a certain period of time when the armed conflict was ongoing for a few days, actually. So the tension continues. We don't know what will happen in Sheikh Jarrah yet. We're still waiting for the Israeli court decisions, but we know at least that the world has heard about it, and I think this is very important. Thank you.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you for that summary, Munir. I would like to call upon Jeff now, and we'll hear a few words from him, and then we'll have some interaction between the two of you, please. So Jeff Halper needs very little introduction to most of the people in the audience, but I will just say that he is an anthropologist who has taught at universities around the world. He's the director of ICAHD. He's a lifelong social justice activist, a Nobel Peace Prize nominee, and his latest book is Decolonizing Israel, Liberating Palestine. We'll say a little bit more about that in a minute, or in a few minutes. In the last 3 years, he's also been on the steering committee of the One Democratic State campaign. So we'll see where we go with that. Jeff, what is the mood amongst Israeli Jews right now? You know, Netanyahu has declared he's the winner of all this. Is that what the Israeli people are feeling? Can you talk a little bit about that, please, Jeff?
Well, hello to everybody, and thanks for having me. And Munir, it's always good to be with you, of course. And let me pick up where Munir kind of left off, because I think sort of tell the other side of the story a little bit. The question of why in a way this all happened. I mean, there's probably a thousand reasons, many of which we don't really know. But you know, the immediate background for these events was the election that was held in March. You know, and Netanyahu is in a desperate situation. And that is, he has, you know, a court trial for corruption, for several counts of corruption running against him. His only hope of staying out of jail, because everybody knows he's guilty, is by remaining prime minister, which, first of all, that gives him a certain amount of protection, but also that he has a say in who the Minister of Justice is, who the judges are, in other words, he can control to some degree the process of the trial, which he's tried to do. And so that desperation, besides wanting to be in power, of course, is behind a lot of this. So we've had 4 elections over the last couple of years, and in no election was Netanyahu able to get elected. He's fallen short of having the necessary votes for a coalition government. And this time as well, so that he tried to set up a government, it failed. And the irony, of course, our situation here is filled with ironies, not always funny ones, but ironies. That is that the swing party, or the party that would decide who could set up a government, Netanyahu or the opposition, was the Islamic Party. The Islamic Party, representing mainly the Bedouin community in the south, in the Negev, in the Nakab, but a very conservative party, actually, that really puts religion and religious issues over Palestinian national, more political issues. And they got 4 seats, and they were able to. Matter of fact, I think they got 6 seats. So they were that swing vote. Now, they didn't in the end. So the problem was that they agreed to go with Netanyahu. But Netanyahu has Netanyahu was the liberal part of the government he wanted to create, if you can imagine that. So the very religious settlers of a much more right-wing party refused to go into a coalition with the Islamic Party, much to Netanyahu's frustration. And in a way, this is a certain breakthrough for Netanyahu, because this is the first time any Israeli politician or party agreed to go into a government coalition with an Arab party. So there was really, in a way, it was sort of a good breakthrough, but in the end, it was too much for his right-wing allies. So what happened was then, he couldn't set up the government, and the mandate to set up an opposition government is now with the opposition, right? Which is also right-wing. I mean, it's as right-wing as Netanyahu's government. Mainly they're ex-Likud people that just hate Netanyahu. That's the only difference. Nevertheless, there was a good chance that if the Islamic Party came in, that they would be able to finally set up a government without, at least to get rid of Netanyahu. Where we go from here, we'll see. I mean, there wouldn't have been a revolution politically, but at least we would have got rid of Netanyahu, which is really what everybody wants. So Netanyahu then had to figure out a way, in his way of instrumentalizing Arabs. I just wrote an article, I put it in the chat line, about how Israel instrumentalizes Arabs, when they're not killing them or erasing them or displacing them. They're instrumentalizing them. They're using them for their own, for their own purposes. So Netanyahu was using the Islamic Party for its own purpose, and all the Palestinians basically. And this set off this whole thing, because just at that moment when the opposition got the mandate to set up a government, that's where you have the Sheikh Jarrah protests. The evictions happened to come down at that time from the court. You had all the protests. You had the beginning of Ramadan. And Netanyahu, through his Minister of Internal Security, this terrible guy named Amir Ohana, who's his henchman, Netanyahu decided with Ohana to inflame the religious tensions around Sheikh Jarrah and the Damascus Gate, where the police, wouldn't allow the young Palestinian kids to sit, and relax on the stairs of Damascus Gate, and of course the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Now he didn't expect the Hamas attack. I mean, that was a surprise. The Israeli intelligence did not expect Hamas to attack. So you might call it a miscalculation, but at any rate, Netanyahu came in very heavy-handedly with the police, with the intention of inflaming religious passions, in order to create a situation where the Islamic Party couldn't join any Israeli government. And there would be then a stalemate, and we'd have to go through a fifth election. So even if the fifth election isn't conclusive, hopefully for him, there won't be an opposition government again. He can keep this whole thing going forever, which is kind of his plan. And that's the immediate background, I think. And what happened, of course, when you start playing with Al-Aqsa on Ramadan, you're really playing with fire. And Hamas decided, with its own, I won't represent, I don't want to represent the Palestinian side of things, but Hamas, I think, had its own instrumental, in this way, Hamas was instrumentalizing Israel, because in its own battles with Fatah and within the election system that was canceled, and they wanted to increase their strength in the West Bank and East Jerusalem, I think they also saw the opportunity that Netanyahu had given them in order to come out as the defenders of Al-Aqsa. And in a way, they succeeded in that strategically. But they showed themselves a much stronger actor than the Palestinian Authority is. So that there's all kinds of ramifications to this thing. Netanyahu did not come out of this looking good. He's not popular. As a matter of fact, most Israelis do not believe that we won. 47% of the Israelis in the last poll said we shouldn't have had the ceasefire, that we stopped too soon. So that shows you where the Israeli public is. But of course, it generated all kinds. I mean, what it did do, and Amir, I'm sure will respond to this later, is that in more probably than any other previous attack, it really galvanized the Palestinians. I mean, in inside 48, in the West Bank, in East Jerusalem, and all over the world, and not only Palestinians, of course. Linda was saying that you all know the big demonstrations, and so it galvanized a lot of people for the Palestinians. But that I think is going to have some important implications. And before I hand it back to Munir, the question that Linda opened with that was in my mind all this time was, where do we go from here? Because on the one hand, two positive things happened out of this, if you can put it that way, with all the death and destruction. It's not, but in political terms, first of all, the Palestinians kind of found a newfound unity, I think, even worldwide in all their fragmented communities. And the international community, the international civil society really began to discover, to the degree to which Palestinians were supported. In other words, what we've been arguing, Munir and I, in our One Democratic State movement, because Munir is with me in that, our One Democratic campaign, is that our main ally is the international civil society, the peoples of the world. Israel might be stronger with governments, true, but that's a fairly shallow support. Israel has lost it to a large degree in the court of public opinion. I think the people are more and more behind the Palestinian issue, and that's a positive thing. I think that and especially the Jewish community. Last week, Ron Dermer, who was the Israeli ambassador to the US during the Trump time for Netanyahu, said that Israel lost the American Jews. They should forget about the American Jews and focus on the evangelicals. That's all Israel has left in the United States. So there's some major sea changes here that I think are important. Now, the big problem that I see, and I'd like Munir to relate to this as well, is this, that in any plan of liberation, in any political program, it has to be led by Palestinians. We can follow them, we support them, we're allies, critical Israelis and all of us abroad, but it has to be led and articulated by, formulated by Palestinians. What do they want? And we have to follow that lead. Until now, our One Democratic State campaign went on the assumption that there would be Palestinian leadership. It's beginning. It's very just beginning now. We're just in the process of trying to get especially our Palestinian, the Palestinians in our group are still in the process of beginning to consolidate a Palestinian base to the One Democratic State campaign. It's slow for different reasons, but that was the idea. Now, the last few weeks created such a polarization between Palestinian Arabs and Israeli Jews that I have a question how much today Palestinian Arabs are willing to even consider coexistence with Israelis. How much are they interested in envisioning a common future, a joint state, one democratic state together? So my fear is that if we lose the Palestinians from the point of view of being able to sort of imagine a common future with Israelis, we've lost that whole basis for a one-state idea, and that puts us back. That I don't see another alternative really. So I'm just worried that the polarization might be so deep, hopefully not permanent, but so deep that it's going to make any kind of political organizing with a vision to the future that has to include Israelis and Palestinians, of course, much more difficult. So that I think is the real question I have in terms of where are we going from here? To what degree are the Palestinians still with us in terms of imagining a joint future?
Jeff, thank you. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you. So Munir, will you respond to that? How do the Palestinians feel at this point in time and the whole thing on coexistence and a joint future? And
Yes.
take it from there. Thank you.
Maybe, yes, I will answer this maybe by saying that I was born in the early 80s, okay? My childhood was basically the first intifada. So my childhood was informed by 7 years, 7 very sensitive years, from the age of 6 to the age of, 5, 6, to the age of maybe 12, 13. It was informed by continuous fear from the police and from the army and shooting and gas and all of this happening around me. So I was, of course, that meant that, for example, I wasn't able to run outside the boundaries of my house, because if the police sees you running, they will immediately attack you, because if you run, it means that you're running from something, which means from them, and you must have done something. And I grew up in a situation where we were afraid of being caught with our drawing notebooks, because you might draw a notebook with a Palestinian flag, which was illegal, very illegal still illegal, but it was more illegal then than it is today. And so I grew up in this fear. And then in my teenage years, I grew up with the illusion of peace coming around, with the Palestinian-Israeli peace process being launched, or so-called peace process, which I understand now has nothing to do with its name and title. And then when I entered the university in 2000, it was the second intifada. So I witnessed building a wall. I volunteered in several places where I also witnessed war crimes taking place, like targeting civilians in Jenin, in Nablus, and in other places. That was all during my university years. And then life went on, and in every short period of time, there is a new violence. However, I personally believe that it is important to continue to believe that we have to coexist. However, this coexistence certainly needs some prerequisites. Coexistence not accept oppression, not accept persecution, not to accept all these violations, to know that this coexistence is based on the fact that we are equal humans, not that there are some humans that are more equal than others, as they, as an expression that I've. And that's why I have been, even since my university years, when I was documenting war crimes, during that period, I believed that it is the only possible solution was one state, one democratic state for everyone. And the reason for that is exactly my belief in human rights. I believe that we should all be equal. We should all exercise the same rights as human beings. It doesn't matter if you're Jewish or Arab or Armenian or. If you are part of this land, if you belong to this land, you should have full rights, regardless of your national or religious identity or origin. Now, I know that what I'm telling you now does not necessarily represent all Palestinians, or does not today represent all Palestinians, and I understand and agree that people have been polarized. However, the Palestinians today, if I want to also addressing your first question about the political program offered by Palestinians and led by Palestinians, I would say that Palestinians in general are disoriented. I've talked to a number of people during the past few years about the one-state solution. people who are working hard for the two-state solution, people who are working for independence, for a Palestinian state. And these people, Jeff, would exactly say, how can we coexist? Why should we? They believe that a one-state solution would certainly mean that the Palestinians will continue to be dominated. So I feel that they not understand fully that this solution involves the end of domination, the change of the apartheid regime that exists today, the end of it, and the beginning of a new system where people are really equal and people have full rights, and where transitional justice would work on changing the psychology of people and the rights of people until full equality is fulfilled. And this is a program that would probably take several decades to accomplish. Of course, it will not be done overnight, certainly. I know that. However, once we get to the situation where it has been acknowledged that not only a number of actions that Israel is doing are wrong, but that the whole idea on which the state of Israel has been established, needs fundamental amendment and change. The idea that you want to build a Jewish state in a place that on which non-Jews have been living for centuries and does not make sense at all. And therefore, we need to get to this fundamental change in our program. Now, have the Palestinians gotten to this understanding? My answer would be generally no. And the reason for that is that the Palestinian Authority and the Palestine Liberation Organization that has been leading the Palestinian people since mid-60s has been convinced, actually, by the international community that the only possible solution that the international community was going to support and accept is two states, because this is exactly what the partition resolution of the United Nations suggested back in 1947 and has become somehow mandatory for Palestinians in order to be engaged in any sort of negotiations. And that's why, in spite of the fact that Palestinians had declared statehood back in 1948, the All-Palestine government, late Yasser Arafat, the leader of the PLO, in 1988, declared the state again, recognizing the acceptance to partition and to have two states. So now, establishing a Palestinian state has become in the idea or in the thinking of the Palestinian mainstream, I would say, Palestinian leadership, which still controls all the institutions, PLO mainly, as well as the Palestinian Authority. The independence, the two-state solution, is called the national project. So now we, in this campaign, when we come and talk about something else, it's been interpreted it has been described as something that is against the national project. So in that way, I don't think we've been called traitors, but we have been called people who have gone outside the flock of the national project. And it will take time for us to clarify these things to the general public. It's easier to explain it to those who have sufficient awareness about history and present. And however, it is much more difficult for those who are part of the establishment and those who are benefiting from the establishment or linked to the establishment or get salaries from the establishment or despite the fact that this establishment is very weak, but still it links many people to it. So it will take time. However, there are some phenomena in the Palestinian community that might be leading. For example, the BDS movement has been even though it doesn't have a position about one state or two states, but it has been putting a number of rights as basic, like the right of return of Palestinian refugees, and as well as equality, etc. So that exists. However, as you and I, Jeff, have discussed before, it is important to start working, on the one-state solution much more clearly, much more strongly. It has been, and to be honest with you, until today continues to be an intellectual idea, and an idea exchange within intellectual circles. But hopefully we can manage finally to get it into a more popular support. But I believe it will take some time. I don't know what you think, Jeff, about this. If you like.
Jeff, would you like an immediate response?
Yeah, unless you have
to respond to the fact, can we wait a few more decades? Is there not an urgency?
I don't know if Munir meant a few more decades. No, I understand what Munir is saying, and it's it's an internal Palestinian dynamic. I mean, there's nothing that people from the outside can do in a sense, except to, to engage with Palestinians and so on. But I mean, he's right that I think that it's an idea that's going to take time. There's an interesting dynamic, the phenomenon, though. I'd like to, if we have a Munir here, I'll put him on the spot because it's a good opportunity. One of the, I guess coming from Israel or coming from outside of Israel, the West, we're much more empowered in some ways. And that is that, we have the idea of a civil society. So I can get up and I can go yell at Netanyahu, and I can go organize a political party if I want to, and I can go do a demonstration, and I can say Israel should be this, or Israel should be that, or we should get rid of Israel, or it should be one state, or should be, I have that authority, as in a sense, and it's not an authority, but I have that right, that space as a citizen. I think for the Palestinians, it's different. Not only, and I am kind of trying to pick up on something you said, Munir, just to clarify it. Not only because of the occupation, obviously. I mean, Israel puts a clamp on that. The Palestinian Authority puts a clamp on that to a large degree. Hamas and Gaza certainly does as well. You have that, but beyond that, the idea, of a national project or a national leadership. That was the Palestinian strength in the beginning with the PLO, that they had a national leadership, they had structures, they even had elections, they had for a people that was scattered, they had one large representative group with a political program and institutions, and as we know, Oslo dismantled all of that, and with the help of Arafat and Abu Mazen. And so in a sense, you're missing that today. There is no more national movement or national strategy or national structure, but the concept remains. So I know I also have talked with Palestinians that say, I like your one-state idea or whatever it is, not just one, but I don't have the mandate. I don't have the authority as a Palestinian to get up and say, this is what, because there's I have to listen to the national leadership. So there's a kind of a built-in catch-22 where people don't feel empowered enough to speak out and organize on a civil society level, beyond being activists, but in a political way to say, here's a new way we could be going as a people, because they're waiting on the national leadership to do that, but there is no national leadership. And so how is there some discussion about that within the Palestinian community? And is there any way, I mean, I've heard vague people say sometimes the PLO should be resuscitated, or, how do Palestinians deal with that obvious issue?
There is a very wide understanding now that PLO needs to be at least reformed, and reformed in a democratic way. It needs to start representing people. And in fact, during the discussions about the most recent elections, this discussion became much more powerful. And hereby elections for everyone, I'm talking about Palestinian elections that were supposed to take place now in May, actually. I think yesterday it was supposed to be, but it was cancelled by Abu Mazen, Mahmoud Abbas. However, I'm one of many who believe that the whole idea of this election, if it's going to be focusing only on the occupied territory and on the Palestinian Authority, which functions under the Israeli Authority, they're actually missing a lot. We need our voices heard in the PLO itself, because the PLO is the body that represents the Palestinian people as a whole. The reason why we believe it's important to reform the PLO, and not the PA here, the PA is a different story. Of course, it will be reformed as well, but the PLO itself is important to change it, is because the PLO has acquired international recognition as a representative of the Palestinian people. And the PLO has been negotiating on our behalf and in our name, and has been giving up things on our behalf and promising to give up more when a final agreement comes, etc. So the PLO is very important. It is in a very important and dangerous position, and that's why it's important to reform it and to be heard by it. However, in the campaign itself, well, we are civil society. We are working without necessarily being a political actor. We're not a political actor. We're not, I mean, a political party. We're so we are working as a civil society. And there are many other initiatives in the civil society for a number of things, you know, that even became more active and more visible in the recent past. Palestinians know very well that everything is going wrong, basically, and that a lot needs to be immediately amended. However, the priorities of our people are different. And this is also a different story. We have been fragmented in many different ways. The priorities of the people of Gaza are different from those in Jerusalem, and are different from those in Bank, and certainly different from diaspora and from Palestinians who have Israeli citizenship. So there are many different priorities that make it difficult for you sometimes to approach someone and say, okay, let's think about the big picture again, you know? But to be honest with you, I think, and here I agree with you, Jeff, I think that the current, these, you know, the recent armed conflict as well as demonstrations might be helpful, actually, in reminding people that, well, we are one at the end of the day. We are all discriminated against because of who we are, because of our identity. And we have to look for solutions, for fundamental solutions, not only, you know, open this crossing, for example, or end the siege on Gaza, for example, only, or protect Al-Aqsa only, or, you know, all these smaller issues. Important, all of them are important, but while we care about them, we have to continue to caring about each one of them separately, but we also have to come back and to think about the bigger picture. Yeah, I believe we will get there finally. Yeah, it needs some work.
See, that's what the one state campaign can do, because it's based on the idea of not just opposing the occupation, but of decolonizing settler colonialism. It is a big picture. Even if you don't accept all the 10 points, I mean, it's a big picture analysis. I've been for the last, you know, couple of weeks in a lot of Zoom conversations with Palestinians, and all the Palestinians, you know, almost all the Palestinians, I mean, understandably, I mean, obviously, it really emphasized the occupation. You have to end the occupation, the resistance, and all of that. but still the idea of a wider struggle that includes Israel, not just reducing everything to the occupation, but to a wider liberation struggle, that still isn't really quite in the public consciousness, I think, for Palestinians as well. And that's really, in a sense, where the One Democratic State campaign is kind of uniquely positioned, because this analysis of settler colonialism is beginning finally, and I see a breakthrough with this in this the last few weeks. Now more and more people are using the term settler colonialism. Just in the last couple months, maybe even, and the last few weeks, people are starting to get, that's becoming the language. You see it in demonstrations on signs, where once it was very academic. I remember when I started talking about it, and other people, it was, nobody understood what in the hell settler colonialism even was, not to mention decolonization. I mean, occupation, apartheid, these are easy things to kind of grasp in a way. But I think now and that's where we're kind of uniquely positioned to build on that wider concept of liberation. And I think we've gone a long way to actually define what decolonization would mean. So I don't know. I just think that we have an important piece to play in all of this, because I see in the whole discourse that's going on, very few have that wider perspective that I think the One Democratic State campaign is presenting.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I'm just going to try to bring out some points too that have come up in the chat line. There's just so many topics, so many issues. But following on what Jeff has just said about his reference to settler colonialism, language starting to change. We've seen, as I mentioned at the beginning, how we've been pushing what is being reported in the media. They've got to address more of the true reality. So whether it was in reports, Channel 4 News, say with Husam Zamlat, when he was being interviewed, how he really pushed on the root of the cause, and not just to talk about, occupations, conflict, two equal sides. It's not. We've seen The Guardian, having articles, far more articles covering the situation and talking about apartheid. That's coming up. Ethnic cleansing is being mentioned. Chris McGreal just had an article about BDS and really reflecting on what happened in South Africa. Okay, we go on to the fact, Munir, we've heard Palestinians say they are not returning to the status quo. The government still want to go back. My own MP wrote to me and said, I just want to get back to status quo as soon as possible. We can't let that happen. We do want to build on this. Now, do you feel that within the Israeli courts that they're feeling the pressure in terms of Sheikh Jarrah? And, it's in the hands very much of the Attorney General, what's happening in Sheikh Jarrah, what's happening in Silwan and those court cases. Are they feeling this international pressure? And from governments, our own government says, these things shouldn't happen. Are you positive about that? We've got Blinken, who's arriving in the country tomorrow. The Israelis will probably be embracing him, Palestinians not. I don't know if you want to comment on those type of things. There was also a question about what's happening on Haram al-Sharif, who's allowed to go there.
Okay.
You mentioned, so a few little points. So we've got 10 minutes to draw each of you out on some of this and any other perspectives, and then I will do my announcements and so forth. So Munir first.
Okay.
Please.
Thank you very much. Regarding Israeli courts, through my career, I have learned not to trust them because they are part of the establishment that has been colonizing Palestine and facilitating the progressing colonization of Palestine. They work under a law that is in nature discriminatory against Palestinians because it aims at changing the demography as much as possible. It aims at dispossessing Palestinians, especially from their real estate property, from their lands, from their houses. Therefore, these courts and these judges work according to this framework. My hope is that, so do I believe that the message has gone to the Israeli courts? I don't know. Even if there are sometimes small victories that take place in the Israeli courts, I know that they would not be precedents that would actually be used more widely in more contexts. So I believe that we cannot wait for the Israeli courts to make the right decision. And regardless of what the decision, we need to continue to emphasize that these courts should not be discussing these issues in the first place. They are going beyond what their jurisdiction should be about. I'm hoping that the Israeli judges will be aware that the displacement of Palestinians is something that the International Court of Justice might actually consider following and investigating further. And I'm hoping that the International Criminal Court might take these issues more seriously, and therefore that even the judges would feel more accountable for any decisions that they make as contributors to war crimes that are taking place, like the displacement of civilians, like home demolitions, some of which are punitive. I know Jeff is an expert in this. Punitive home demolitions where collective punishment, if your family member is accused of terrorism, they would demolish your house, even if that's only a family member, etc. So this persecution needs to end immediately. But the more important thing to happen would be to change this regime, finally. Yes, we have to continue struggling on every case, and we are doing that. I mean, we are using any possible venue now, international law venue, to demand Israel to stop these violations. However, it is essential to always keep the bigger goal ahead of us and in our goals. As you said, Linda, I'm happy actually that during this situation that happened recently, people have become more courageous in describing things in their own names, in using terms like apartheid, using terms like ethnic cleansing, etc. And this is important. It not only for talking to the rest of the world, but also talking among ourselves as Palestinians. It is very important because it also informs what we might end up aiming at. For example, the apartheid framework, and apartheid is not just a term, it's a whole framework. It's a way of looking at Palestine, Israel. The apartheid framework has been becoming stronger and stronger among Palestinian, Israeli, and international human rights organizations. And this development that happened actually during the last year, by the way, before this thing happened. We've heard, of course, Palestinians have been saying that for a while, but now we have the two Israeli organizations, Yesh Din and B'Tselem. And now we have Human Rights Watch, and who knows who in the future also will be also using this framework. The benefit of this framework is, if what we're living under is apartheid, it means that only ending the occupation, Jeff, is not enough. You know, just the occupation of 1967 is not enough. The only treatment of apartheid is dismantling apartheid and building a democracy instead, building a system that does not aim at having one racial group dominating another racial group, one group of people dominating another. To be honest, from my point of view, this development, in our understanding, by the way, there was Palestinian resistance to this term, even in the human rights community in the past, because they were afraid that this might put the whole independence mission in danger. However, now Palestinians have gotten to the situation where they understand that this simple solution that was presented to us back in the 90s and early 2000s, that it's only about Israel withdrawing its army from some areas and then, you know, there will be a free state of Palestine and that's the solution. This myth is not true. First, it doesn't help. It doesn't actually solve everything. Secondly, apparently it will not happen, right? So despite all the negative things that are going on, this might be a good development, that people are starting to see things clearly. Palestinians, Israelis, important, you know, like these organizations like B'Tselem and Yesh Din, yes, they are left-wing, but they are Zionist left-wing. It's, you know, it's, so it's, things are becoming clearer for a new audience, I would say, in both areas. And the international community. So I think this is a good development. I think I should stop here. You said 10 minutes. I might have talked for 5 minutes or more. So maybe Jeff wants to respond, and then if anything is left for me to say, I will do that.
Thank you, Munir. So some passages from you, Jeff, please.
All right. Well, let me do a positive thing then as well, and pull us back a little bit into the Israeli context. You know, what's happened with the really tremendous awakening of civil society, the protests, and you know, and the whole new discussion that's going on Palestine, has really given us an opportunity that you know, and as Munir said, we can't just let this thing die down again. We have to try to keep the momentum going. And if it's true that the international civil society is our main ally, that's tremendously important that they're mobilized. They're not mobile. You know, again, my complaint, Portnoy's complaint is that that they need a political program. BDS is not enough. BDS is important. It's keeping us on the map, but it's bringing up, you know, I think it's an important campaign, but it's just a tool. The three elements of BDS do not make up a political program. And without a political program to advocate for, the international civil society is kind of paralyzed in a way. You know, if the politician says, okay, what do you want? AOC says, what do you want? Or Boris Johnson says, what do you want? You can't just say end the occupation. You can't come back with slogans. You have to have a program. And that, I think, is hopefully what the One Democratic State campaign is working on. You know, it's a process, and I don't think we're the main actor necessarily, but I think that's the idea, is that we would help insert a political program into the whole discussion to give it more focus and direction, and of course Palestinian led. But the, you know, with that opening, there's another interesting issue in terms of Israel, and that is that, you know, say what you will about Netanyahu, he's a very skilled manipulator. He's a very skilled manager of things, you know. He's a native English speaker. He knows everybody. He has a grand strategy. I mean, he has a global strategy. He knows what's going on in the world. He knows that the powers that be. He knows the internal politics. He knows, you know, everybody from Xi to Putin to Bolsonaro to, you know, to everybody basically. You know, Israel is very proactive in terms of its arms. You know, I've written about its arms exports, and so it has a lot of leverage among countries. All of that is true, but but the next person after Netanyahu isn't going to be like that. That's part of our opening. First of all, Netanyahu himself isn't as skilled as he was, because he's been so preoccupied over the last couple of years with his court case and with trying to stay in power and having transition governments and just some, you know, Israel hasn't had a budget for 2 years, that he's lost a focus. One of the big criticisms of him that came out of this last clash, you know, the attack on Gaza and on the Palestinians, was that Israeli Hasbara, our propaganda, was so weak. Here you've got all the social media, and Israel really almost wasn't there. Now, Netanyahu is gone. It might take another few months to get him out of office, but he's not going to come back, I don't think. And the next person that takes over is not going to have his skills. That, I think, is really going to be crucial. It could be, if I give you names of people who would take over, you've never heard of them even. Gideon Sa'ar, Naftali Bennett, Yair Lapid, Benny Gantz. You know Benny Gantz, but you know, the war criminal. But otherwise, you know, you don't really know a lot of the up and coming politicians that are liable to take over the government after Netanyahu. These are people, these are local politicians. They have local interests. They're very parochial. They don't know English so well, a lot of them. And I think missing those skills of Netanyahu's managed to keep the lid on. And he's managed to keep this very unpopular occupation going and keep Israel's international standing fairly high. After him, I think there's going to be a complete collapse of that. And if we're primed for a post-Netanyahu period in terms of a proactive political program and a strategy, I think there's going to be a tremendous opening, especially given what's happened over the last few weeks. So, you know, I'm actually optimistic about the opportunities we're going to have. Whether or not we meet those opportunities is another question.
Excellent. Thank you. And so as Munir and Jeff and their colleagues continue to talk, continue to mobilize, hopefully strengthening one another as they work their way out of this again and basically refusing to return to the status quo, we as internationals must also continue with our mobilization and to really respond to what we hear in the media or whatever, which is not accurate, and continue to putting pressure on our governments. Now, certainly within ICAHD UK, we have a couple of tools that I would like to highlight at this moment. One of them, again, goes back to the copy of Jeff's new book, Decolonizing Israel, Liberating Palestine, Zionism, Settler-colonialism, and the Case for One Democratic State. An interesting development is that the first print of these books is almost gone now. So Pluto Press has to go to print earlier than they anticipated. And that's because people are looking for answers. They are looking for a way ahead. And this is proving very possible. You can get copies through ICAHD UK. Please go onto our website, order them, spread them around, let people know about that. And, you know, within it, there's the 10-point plan from the One Democratic State campaign, which the Palestinians wanted included in this book. So it's a way to help spread awareness and understanding of something that can work, which will be far more fair and just, including Palestinians in all of historic Palestine, as well as the Palestinian refugees. Secondly, we've brought out a new postcard, and Malcolm's bringing it up on the screen. End home demolitions, that is the front picture, and then on the reverse side, we've got information about really the aims and objectives of what we're doing in the UK, ways people can engage with us. We are offering these to you free of charge. You can come onto the website, order your packs of 50 cards. If you like, give us a donation toward post and packaging, but we want these spread right over the country. So as demonstrations continue, as we go back to having stalls in our local towns and villages and cities, please go equipped. So all of you help us by ordering these. We have other resources. You'll find them on the website. We have specific campaigns that we work on. And in fact, during our next webinar, which is set for the 23rd of June, Wednesday, the 23rd of June, same time, 5 p.m. UK time, we are going to be in this event led through by Dr. Monica Wusterman, who is the chair of ICAHD UK, bringing on our partners that we collaborate with in campaigns on demolitions, displacement, reaches out to what's happening with JCB, the National Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children, demolitions, displacement, all of this. Again, we'll be covering, and that is, again, to help give guidance to how people can campaign in their local areas. So please join us on that occasion. If you are not a member of ICAHD UK, we'd love you to join us. We also want you to sign up for our newsletters, our actions you can take bulletins. These each come out monthly. So again, being a political organization, we depend upon people like you. We are more than reacting to situations happening in Israel, Palestine. We are more than humanitarian aid. We are working for this real political change. So we'd love you to be part of our organization as we also, again, very much collaborate with other organizations to help change history. I'm sorry we don't have more time for today, but we really have come to the end of this session. It leaves me to thank Munir, Nuseibah, and Jeff Halper for joining us, speaking to us, sharing your perspectives, so valuable at this time as we ask, where do we go from here? So thank you to our entire audience. It's been wonderful to have you with us today. Thank you very much. Together in the struggle. Thank you. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.